Hey, everybody, welcome to the Friday News Lunch from the Bucks County Beacon. I'm Kevin Mahoney.
And I'm Cyril Mikolajko.
And each week, we'll serve up the week's top stories affecting our communities and the nation. And we'll hope you join us live every Friday at noon on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, X, or right here on the Beacon's webpage at buckscountybeacon.com. You know it. Wait, here we do it again. This happened again. Hold on a second. We're going to do that one more time, everybody. You got it? We have this little weird thing happen with our music, so I'm just going to let this play through for you a little bit here because it is so full of life and enjoyable. There we go. We're back. The Friday News Lunch. Yes, remember, while you're over at the buckscountybeacon.com, do go ahead and check it out. And you can become a member and a supporter. You can become a monthly member for as little as $5 a month, or you can drop a one-time donation to show your support for locally grown, independent, progressive media. This week served up some doozies, I'll say, and let's see if we can get through lunch without an antacid, shall we? Maybe we can do that. Maybe we can at least do that today, huh? Well, this week, the FBI and the Bucks County Attorney General are looking into a fake video that shows pro-Trump mail-in ballots being destroyed by a man with dark skin and an accent repeating F Donald Trump. Now, the Bucks County DA stated that, quote, "Our investigation has concluded this video was fabricated in an attempt to undermine confidence in the upcoming election." Oh, we're going to have a little bit to say about that for sure. Now, the video, despite being flagged by the FBI and law enforcement as being fake, is still circulating on X and other social media platforms. Matter of fact, I just checked it out right before we went to air today, and yes, it's still available for viewing on those platforms. Crazy. Now, in a 4-3 decision, the PA Supreme Court ruled that people whose mail-in ballots are rejected for not following technical procedures in state law, for example, not dating the envelope, they could still cast provisional ballots. Now, that decision is expected to affect thousands of mail-in votes this election. Now, fortunately, here in Bucks County, we are one of the 29 counties in Pennsylvania that already offers voters the chance to fix errors on their ballot to make sure that every vote is counted. However, in other counties, they are not afforded that. So we're going to see what kind of impact that has on the election. Ashley Ehasz goes it alone at a candidate forum in the PA 1st Congressional District that was sponsored by the New Pennsylvania Project. And once again, good old Fitzy, Brian Fitzpatrick, has gone out of his way to avoid any public debate ahead of the election. AFSCME, the largest public sector union in Pennsylvania and the country for that matter, has gone all in on getting Kamala Harris elected. AFSCME has been knocking doors, raising money, and making calls to sound the alarm about plans to dismantle unions in Project 2025. What one member called the, quote, 900 pages of terror, for sure. Now, the final New York Times Siena poll shows that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are tied at 48% of the popular vote. What does that mean? Well, it certainly means that the polls are irrelevant at this point. And what matters is what's happening on the ground in counties and states across the country. Kamala Harris doubled down on statements by John Kelly, Trump's former chief of staff, earlier this week, that Donald Trump meets the definition of a fascist. Yep. At a CNN town hall, which Trump refused to attend, Anderson Cooper asked Harris whether she believed Trump met the definition of a fascist. She quickly stated, "Yes, I do." Kamala Harris will be joined by Beyonce and Willie Nelson, both Texas natives, for a rally later on today in Houston focused on abortion rights. Before the rally, she's going to appear on Brené Brown's podcast, which has an audience of millions, right? And a majority of those audience members are women. Meanwhile, Trump will be on Joe Rogan's Brocast. Again, you can see where things are lining up here. Elon Musk pro-Trump America PAC has been sending $100 checks to residents of Pennsylvania and 6 other swing states who signed the PAC's petition in support of free speech and guns. Last week, Musk upped the ante by handing out checks for $1 million to random people who signed a petition. The U.S. Justice Department sent Musk a warning that the payments might be in violation of U.S. election law. Musk has ignored the warnings and continues the sweepstakes, while law enforcement officials throw up their hands and say, yeah, somebody should look into this. How about somebody do something about it? How about that? Crazy. Now, a couple new pieces in the Bucks County Beacon should be on your reading list for the weekend. Pat LaMarche has got this article, awesome article, Dystopia Now, Big Tech and Menstrual Surveillance at the Service of an Anti-Abortion Trump Administration. Yep, that shines a light on what we can expect in a second Trump term, especially when it comes to the further degradation of the rights of women. And Jeff Abbott gives us something to chew on after the election in his piece, Would Compulsory Voting Strengthen Democracy in the United States? Well, that is only a small sampling of what's been going on this week as we lead up to the election. Cyril, how you hanging in there, man?
Oh, a little stressed.
Little stressed.
Nerves are a little racked as we get closer to the election. But, just trying to keep forging ahead and making sure that the Beacon's publishing the news that, people need to read about, so that they can make informed choices in November up and down the ballot.
100%, which is one more reason that you should head over to the buckscountybeacon.com, and right at the top, there's a nice little banner that says the 2024 voter guide. Click on the 2024 voter guide, and that will give you all the info you need to know before you head to the polls. It's like we've said before on this show, is the case when it comes to especially local offices or regional offices, it can be difficult to get accurate information on it to really understand what's at stake by any particular candidate. Right. People who are running for state house and things like this like to throw up very general messages about how good they are. And they like to have commercials where they look like nice people. Right. And that's all you have to go on. Well, the Beacon kind of delivers in their voters guide, actually kind of digging in behind the kind of schmaltz of kind of the PR machine and gets to what's really at stake. So check it out, buckscountybeacon.com. Click on their 2024 voters guide right at the top of the page. So I guess that's something people could be doing this weekend too as well. So, Cyril, well, first, I first got this from a family member that said to me, "Did you see this? I can't believe this." And it was about this fake video that's getting circulated to this, like I said in the headlines, it's getting circulated as of right now, a fake video that shows somebody tearing up pro-Trump mail-in ballots. And very interestingly, right, what you see ballots, which again, the Bucks County election officials, the DA, and the FBI have all said are fake. The Bucks County Democratic Party and the Bucks County Republican Party have both come out and said that they're fake. So let's be on the same page. Just say these are fake, right? There's a bunch of reasons. If you click on some of the links in the show notes, you can take you to the breakdown about why they know this is fake. But what I found more interesting than there's a video doing this but the video shows these ballots being opened and then you hear F Donald Trump and they get torn in half. But the hands that you see are dark hands, dark skin, right? And the voice that you hear has an accent, right? So I look at that and I'm like, the damage is not in the kind of people actually at the end of the day thinking that they're real. The damage is in really fanning the flames of racism, anti-immigration, right? And the same kind of stuff that the Republican Party has been doubling down on as we lead into this election.
Yeah, it's truly horrifying. And what really worries me is that this isn't going to be the last one we see. Right?
No.
This is just the first shot. And unfortunately, this is going to be the new normal, with AI and technology being weaponized, with social media incapable or unwilling to kind of, police this type of dangerous disinformation. It's really going to test the strength and foundation of our democracy and whether it can kind of uphold this new wave of election mis and disinformation.
Yeah, I teach this class called, Activist Writing Media. And one of the books that we're reading this semester, I probably mentioned this on the show already, was called Messengers of the Right by Nicole Hemmer. And what she's tracking is some of this early kind of basically right-wing conservative media activists who launched this kind of whole endeavor to have a major impact in politics through through these kind of like alternative media sources. But it was happening in post-World War II era, right? So we're not talking, this is way pre-Fox News and everything else. And she's tracking it in part because she wants to kind of, in a sense, lay the predicate, if it were, like saying like Fox didn't start with Fox News. This has been a long-term strategy. And in her book and her description of what they did is they said, look, part of the strategy was to do one thing first, is like to go right at kind of like fact-based, reality-based, kind of quote unquote objective journalism. Now, you and I are both going to have our own critiques of that whole idea about objective journalism, given the kind of the slant that, you know, people like from the left have always seen in the media. But just put that aside. But at least reporting that is based upon, say, facts and reality, and is interested in getting to some sort of even lowercase t truth, right? So they wanted to go to war at that first, and the way that they did that was associate objective journalism or professional journalism with a liberal bias. Right, and said you can't trust objective journalism because that's just their strategy to make it appear as if they're neutral. You can only trust us. Why? Because we share the same values as you do. We go to the same churches that you do, and so on. And it was a way of basically saying that, no, we're not having objective facts and then this kind of ideological media on whatever side. No, everything's an ideological media. And we saw this same kind of strategy that was being brought forward by all sorts of these kind of like right-wing warriors from Moms for Liberty, kind of across the board in our contemporary politics. And that whole idea is so true. And so when I look at something like this about this fake news and a kind of threat to democracy, it's like we don't have the baseline, right? I mean, the repair that it has to happen to our democratic culture is deep. Right. And that is as in our media, that is in the way that we talk about the purpose of education, and the way that we kind of support institutions that continue to support democracy.
Yeah, and then we just have a lacking small d democratic culture in this country to begin with. And you know, some of the ways you can look at that is through political participation with elections or leading up to elections, whether it's just having town halls if your congressman will actually host one, which ours won't.
Fitzpatrick looking at you.
Yes, or just people like attending these types of events. But so this book, this traces it back to like groups like the John Birch Society,
Yep.
and that would be like them like just mailing pamphlets to their membership, or just like Lyndon LaRouche people outside of the post office, like handing out their newspapers. Like those are the ways that they were disseminating it in the past, and now with like this technological revolution, it's just easier. It's just the kind of, you can just press a button and boom, you're on Twitter, Elon Musk's retweeting it, and millions of people are watching it.
Yeah, exactly. And the overhead costs are virtually non-existent, right? To be able to do that kind of disinformation at such a level. So it's look, I mean, I know I keep on hearing from people about they're getting increasingly nervous as we lead up to the election. And one of the things that I've been, like, my mantra has been tried to be is like, it's okay. Right? Kind of like, and I don't mean it's okay in terms of like our democracy is not at stake, because I believe it is. I mean, it's okay in a sense, like, look, you can pull away from like following the polls from minute to minute about what's actually going on, right? That has to do with more of a business model for like big media organizations than anything else at this point. What you can do is you can focus on things that you can do in your community, right? And put your attentions there, making sure that people that can get to the polls, making sure you're letting other people know. It's like, yes, yeah, oh, you saw that video? Yeah, I know, read about it, it's fake, and kind of move on. Kind of keep that kind of steady moving forward in defense of what we're doing, and then in the meantime doing anything that you can to try to get Kamala Harris elected this fall.
It underscores the importance of person to person organizing.
Yeah.
And Bucks County has provided us with examples of this being successful, specifically in Central Bucks School District and Penridge School District, where it wasn't just like kind of like the local Democratic Party, but other grassroots organizations like Advocates for Inclusive Education in Central Bucks, or the Ridge Network in Penridge, who really made it a point to educate the community about the issues that everyone cares about. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat, right? That everyone cares about, and just providing facts and analysis so that they can make their own decisions. And what we saw is that when that happens, when people are effectively organizing, educating, and mobilizing the community with this type of person to person, in person organizing, well, we saw in Central Bucks, the Democrats, and in Penridge, the Democrats swept the school boards because you had these kind of fear-based Republican Moms for Liberty campaign just spreading misinformation and disinformation about teachers or librarians, trying to groom your children because of, a Toni Morrison book in the library or in a teacher's classroom.
Yeah, like 100%. And I do think it's going to, come back to exactly that for this election. And I do think it's valuable that, we've got, when people ask like, well, protection of the vote. I'm like, look, we have this PA Supreme Court decision just now where you have a group of Republicans were putting pressure upon making sure that ballots were not going to get counted if somebody, for example, didn't date the outside of their envelope. Right. Pennsylvania has got this weird ballot, right? For those folks who may not know, where not only do you have a secret ballot that you put inside a secret envelope that you put inside another envelope, either you write your name and stuff on the outside, it has a line for dating it, right? And that date line there is not the same as the postmark, right? The postmark is the one that says, there's a date, but you're supposed to put it down. And so there's been an argument that like, well, look, this is kind of really irrelevant, especially if you've got a postmark that shows you when it's mailed. But they've been trying to purge those ballots that have something like, a missing date on it. Now, as I said here, about 29 counties, including Bucks County, reaches out to voters and say, hey, your ballot is not going to get counted unless you come in to fix this. Right. I know Montgomery County, for example, they've got a little elections van that goes around, right, to kind of meet up with folks to make sure that they are able to correct their ballots. Like stuff like that. That is a voter service. That is a pro-democracy service because you basically want to make sure, because you don't know who they voted for. You just know that there's a ballot that's got a little kind of missing piece of information. You want to make sure that that vote gets counted. Well, PA Republicans have been trying to kind of like have all those voters purged. Last week on the show, we talked about how like you have these Republicans once again are trying to kind of disenfranchise overseas military ballots, right? And that's good pieces of information as you're talking to people who are wanting to go to the polls. Like, look, this is the kind of like systematic election interference that is going on here. All we're doing here is trying to make sure that you've got the right to vote. We want to make sure that you can get out to the polls, and we want to protect democracy moving forward. So,
and Republican Scott Perry, a veteran himself, is one of those Republicans trying to suppress the military vote. And the York Dispatch actually had a really good editorial calling him out on that and making the case about why he needs to get a pink slip from voters. I really wish that was, we could read something with that kind of like moral clarity and intellectual honesty and journalistic integrity in our local daily newspaper,
yeah,
the Bucks County Courier Times, which just won't happen.
You don't think that's going to happen, Cyril? You don't think they're going to see the light now that, maybe after democracy, they'll see the light? You think that'll be the case?
That's when it'll happen.
After democracy, I can see like, the sad closing editorial of the editorial board as like as they're like taken over by some sort of right-wing think tank or something like that, after democracy. Crazy. Well, I mean, I guess Brian Fitzpatrick has done it again, and we've already alluded to this. I mean, the New Pennsylvania Project had a voter forum, right? And again, invitations go out to all candidates, right? The idea is to have opportunities to kind of engage voters. We saw that the debate for the PA First was canceled because one one guy said he wasn't going to do it anymore. Then Fitzpatrick said, "Oh well," right? So no need to show up for anything then. And then every attempt by Ashley Ehas to kind of ensure that voters are going to get a chance to actually see a serious debate have been just ignored by Fitzpatrick. And then so here you have a forum, and you have Ashley Ehas there forced to go up there and kind of like do it alone, like in a sense to make a case about why you need to get rid of Fitzpatrick. One of them being is like the guy just didn't even show up.
Yeah, and again, the Bucks County Courier Times didn't cover it. Neither did the Bucks County Herald, right? So I don't understand like how they can call themselves newspapers if they're not covering local democracy, right? They didn't even. I mean, how what kind of excuse could they give us for not sending a reporter to this candidate forum, nonpartisan candidate forum at Bucks County Community College, or before that, the Women's Rights, Reproductive Rights Forum at the community college a couple weeks earlier. And again, they still haven't published, since May 29th, the story on this congressional race. I mean, is the Bucks County Courier Times the worst daily newspaper in Pennsylvania?
I see a contest coming up. I think an award. I think we could have like I don't know, lights out award. We'll have we could give them award. Oh, this is a great idea. We got to do this. like a light switch turned off plaque, right? That what kind of lights out award for the worst kind of like local journalism in the state.
Or a PU Litzer for the coverage that just stinks, right? It's non-existent.
I like it. I like that. That's okay. See, now you got my wheels turning. Like I'm happy again. Look at this. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, every journalist should be embarrassed, right? That works at that newspaper. And I don't understand is like, how does one of the journalists there, if they're not getting direction from the editor, how do they not step forward and say, hey, I want to cover this, right? Like this is happening in our community. We don't want to have low information voters going into the ballot box. But as far as I know, nothing, unless of course, there are journalists in the newsroom who have tried, but have just been who have had their efforts rebuffed. If any Bucks County Courier Times journalist wants to come forward with a story about that, please don't hesitate to reach out or DM me on Twitter.
Yeah, 100%. It could even be kind of like the journalist who wishes to remain anonymous for fear of their job, right? Who wants to let you know actually what's happening behind the scenes. That'd be kind of a cool story. Of course, if we're interested in truth and understanding why our local coverage has been so bad, that would be helpful, I think, for people. But yeah, who knows? It's always baffles me. I talk about this. We talk about this in like in my classes too as well. We're just looking at trying to understand like ranges of coverage and bias in coverage and things like this. And it's always one of my favorite moments when I say, well, let's look at kind of you're Bucks County, and I show them an article from the New York Times about how Bucks County is such a critical election. And say, well, let's look at some of the local papers, what their coverage is. Like, well, it's weird. You can't find any, right? It's just strange. It's a strange thing, but crazy. So I have to say, I just want to give it a shout out to the folks over at the Penn Capital Star, and particular in City and State, for a really good article on the AFSCME, basically AFSCME getting behind the support of getting Kamala Harris elected. Not only have they kind of been one of the largest donors and contributing volunteer hours and things like this to getting out the vote and so on, but they've also, their messaging has gone right at Project 2025. Right. And it's gone right at things like this and building the connections as they're knocking on doors, they're talking to voters, and they're kind of publishing pieces talking about how this is a threat to not only the future of unions in Pennsylvania and across the country, but also to working people more broadly. Right. And it was really good to see not only there was a story about it, but most of the kind of voices that were really featured in it were AFSCME workers, who are out there and doing this campaigning for that. And it's so awesome to see like a union, that is really educating its own members, right? And active members who are kind of seeing the connections between something like Project 2025 and their own futures.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see an engaged working class. Have you noticed anything from the like Pennsylvania AFL-CIO?
Yeah, I saw support for Fitzpatrick.
Yes.
So I saw one of those things. And
What
I think, look,
happened to that union? you know?
well, I'll tell you. Well, first of all, let's be clear. So this everybody knows, especially for folks who are not kind of tuned into union culture, you're not a member of union and this kind of stuff. First of all, everybody needs to know AFL-CIO is not a union. The AFL-CIO is an organization for facilitating member unions, right? It is it's supposed to be a kind of collaborative voice across unions to speak for kind of working interests, right? Working class interests, right? However, if you know anything about the background of a lot of unions, is then and the AFL-CIO, well, there's been kind of the AFL was kind of more conservative side of things. The CIO was a kind of more kind of like progressive, working class oriented, ground up kind of organization. They merged way back. And in recent years, like the past kind of couple decades, there's been growing rifts among kind of member unions about what the AFL-CIO is standing for. And there was a very high profile break of unions like SCIU, for example, who broke from the AFL-CIO, right? And started kind of saying, look, we need to be doing more organizing, right? Enough of this kind of like business unionism, let's get friends with politicians nonsense. We need to actually be out there organizing workers. Right. And so the AFL-CIO as a branching organization lost a lot of its member unions, some of its most powerful member unions. Right. And a lot of the unions that now dominate the Pennsylvania, right, AFL-CIO are some of the more conservative unions that happen to be leaning more towards Trump and so on. They tend to be more in the trades. They tend to be more and so on. So when we're seeing, kind of like the AFL-CIO coming out and supporting people like Brian Fitzpatrick and not doing the education about Project 2025 and so on, not encouraging kind of workers to be out there organizing like all the time, right? It has to do with kind of these weird internal politics that are happening in the AFL-CIO, less so than what's actually going to benefit the working class.
Although it's weird because I feel like the national organization does a better job than
they do
the state and PA. So I'm not sure why there's not more accountability to its its state chapters, why they wouldn't be pushing that, because in the end, like, worker education and worker mobilization is good for workers, right? And ensures that
totally
we have policies that support people's workers' rights and the rights to form a union.
100%. I think like it should be the message that coming very publicly from national AFL-CIO right on down, say, like, if you are not educating your members, if you're not educating all member unions, stuff like that, about Project 2025 and the threats that we're facing to kind of like to union rights and organizing rights going forward, then you're not doing your job. And to put pressure upon those people to get the hell out. Right. I mean, I just don't know. I mean, old school unionism, that would be no problem. Right. That you'd be clear about where you stood. Right. You could, what it means to be standing on the side of workers would be really, really clear. But, look, money, power, and influence corrupts everything. And I do think that is part of what's going on and part of the kind of timidness of the AFL-CIO. We saw their willingness to hold on to a guy who had been harassing kind of union members for years as a vice president, was finally kicked out, right? I did an interview with Rick Smith about this kind of years ago because Rick Smith is the one that blew the whistle on this, right? So, I mean, look, there's corruption that seeps into the AFL-CIO, and I do not want to badmouth everybody that's in that. I know there's awesome people that are doing really hard work behind that, but unless they're going to stand up for workers' rights and stop this nonsense of backing kind of like a pseudo-centrist like Brian Fitzpatrick so publicly, then you've lost your meaningful influence on the working class in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, Brian Fitzpatrick is not going to save the working class from Project 2025, and Project 2025 has unions right smack in the center of its crosshairs.
Yeah, there's like literally, Cyril is not exaggerating. It's like there's chapters on it, right? And it's not just about, unions are bad. It's how to systematically dismantle workers' rights to organize. Right? Those are fundamentally different things than just kind of saying, yeah, we don't like unions. No, this is about how do you prevent workers from advocating for themselves to improve their working conditions, period. It's crazy. And not even, I should even say, it even things like agencies that are secure, like workplace safety, how you get rid of those so that corporations do whatever the hell they want, how you limit the ability for workers to sue when they've been harmed, right, by the working conditions that they exist in. How do you be able to kind of support communities, right, that are damaged by corporations and corporate greed that are kind of like polluting their waters, right, and their communities. That's what's at stake in this, right? And this is like a systematic plan in order to kind of accomplish that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why Republicans are trying to make child labor great again, right? They're trying to bring back child labor. Like, that's not an accident. That's part of the plan.
Yeah, and I'm. This is the thing I'll have to say. Like, we didn't talk about this ahead of the show, but just what you just said about this child labor stuff is like my biggest concern leading up to the election, and why I was saying at that head of the show, we've got a lot of work and to kind of like to do after this election about a democratic culture, is to see people getting behind and actively and publicly cheering for a policy that would send 12-year-olds back to the mill, right? And especially in some of these kind of Midwestern states and things like this is just astonishing to me. I mean, meatpacking plants, right? Being sent like kids, like 12, 13 years old, going to be working meatpacking plants was historically and notoriously one of the most dangerous places to work in the country, right? And then kind of like watching them clap as they sign bills allowing for that to happen. And then a party rallying behind the cause of sending kids back into the mills. That's just crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we also, it's related to the kind of systematic attacks on public education, right? First, you dismantle public education, and then the next step is to kind of do away with compulsory education, which big business was against in the first place when it was started. I believe over like 120 years ago, and so this is just part of that legacy.
Oh, crazy, crazy, crazy. Well, yeah, I mean, it all goes back to there's a lot at stake here. So I'm Cyril. I'm curious about your take. I mean, I mentioned this one poll. I mean, there's a whole bunch of polls that are out there right now. Is that I found New York Times had it splattered all over their front page, and like the last New York Times saying on a poll before the election showing an even split of 48% and 48% of the popular vote. It's like I find that one to be really not useful. Right? It seems to be, I don't know. I don't know what role, if any, you think these polls even have now. I mean, given its track record and so on. I'm just kind of curious about like your take on some of these things.
I mean, after what we saw in 2016, we know we just can't trust the polls much anymore, right? I mean, no one would have seen Donald Trump winning that election if you were just paying attention to the polls. No one would have predicted that, right? Yet it happened. Um, you know, Obviously, Trump has a solid base, which is maybe like what 80% of the Republican Party, if not more. And then what about like, it makes me think about like, what about this group of voters, the quote unquote kind of like normies that maybe aren't very politically engaged? Where do they stand? And one of the problems, that I see is that like, there's a lot of news deserts across the country. And then even when there's daily newspapers like we have in Bucks County, you're not getting like actual like, good and a wide breadth of like political reporting. And I don't think the Courier Times has published a single article on Project 2025, right?
Yeah.
And so maybe if like you have like like politically disengaged voters for whatever reason, right? Maybe they're working 2 or 3 jobs, right? Which George W. Bush once famously said, "That's so American," in a speech. But if maybe like part of that is just like low information voters are just maybe they're still siding with Trump because they don't really have all the information about what's at stake, what Project 2025 has mapped out in order to kind of dismantle electoral democracy and just democratic institutions and civil society in the country. And then maybe just, people are kind of just embracing, this authoritarian kind of vision for America. And that wouldn't be unique to America, right? So, like in El Salvador, uh, you know, they they've reelected, this young right-wing politician who refers to himself as the world's coolest dictator,
Right.
Bukele. And then in Hungary, um, we have what's his name? Well, Viktor Orban.
Viktor Orban. Yeah, yeah.
And so, unfortunately, this is just a global trend, and we've seen things like this like happen in the past as well, and maybe we are trending in that direction, but hopefully not. Hopefully, I'm wrong. But what's scary is that this election is going to be won on the margins, right? And part of that issue is just like the electoral college as well. Even though that poll does state, like in the popular, for the popular vote, it's neck and neck. Where what did Joe Biden won by, what was it, like 4 million votes?
Mhm.
I guess.
Yeah, and we'll see. We know that the popular vote does not translate into election victory, as you actually were just saying. So even, I mean, I remember after, Hillary Clinton lost, about how many people were like, but she won the popular vote. And the devastating reality of that is like, it didn't matter, you know. And, and we've talked about this on the show. I know you've written about this too, as well, as about, you have this creeping anti-democratic form of government that we have, right? We have a Senate that is less and less representative of people in this country. It's so out of whack, it's crazy. Most of the Supreme Court justices who have been put on the court, in particular by Donald Trump, but also by George W. Bush and so on, were put on by presidents who lost the popular vote. So these are institutions that are, there's a reason why people like Mitch McConnell and so on target the Supreme Court. There's reasons why that there's these vigorous defenses of these anti-democratic institutions by the Republicans and the right wing, is because they know that they can then steer the course of our society if they control these anti-democratic institutions.
Yeah, I mean, and maybe we just pivot for a second to
Yeah,
Jeff Abbott's article about like compulsory voting.
sure. Yeah.
There's an argument to be made that compulsory voting would kind of like insulate us from these tendencies towards, extreme politics. Jeff did a great job kind of using like Australia and Brazil as kind of case studies. Although the Brazil case does show with the, not this last election, but the previous one, when Bolsonaro, kind of like the Trump of the tropics, won. Although there was, obviously, voter suppression and just and other forms of disenfranchisement that happened in the run up to Bolsonaro's victory, like taking candidates off of the ballot. They kind of like had a legal coup to remove Dilma Rousseff. But in a place like Australia, you have typically there's like 90% voter turnout. And, I mean, the question I have for you is like, do you think like that would kind of help in the United States, kind of, like I said, like insulate us from kind of the kind of authoritarian populism that and xenophobia that the Trump campaign has kind of championed, and that just fuels its election campaign?
So I would say this. I would say that I think it would do that only if it's part of a broader package of things. I've been thinking a lot about that. That article, I mean, when you first brought that one up, like, and I was like, this is really good. I remember actually, because Australia's been doing compulsory voting for like, as you mentioned in there, for like 100 years, right? They just celebrated the kind of centennial of doing that. And in Australia, you have a bunch of other institutions like around that kind of tradition that support, the right to vote. right? So you have celebrations, for example, on election days. You have the ability. It's much easier to kind of get out and vote for that. The elections officials, or I forget what they call it, Department of Elections or whatever it is in Australia, has the highest approval rating of any agency in government, right, in Australia. So that gives us a window into, I think, where that's successful, right? When you're supporting the right to vote, when you have a culture that is encouraging the right to vote, right, and democracy, that can be useful. The Brazil case, I'm glad he brought up the Brazil case actually in that piece, because it does point us to say, okay, if we think a single technical fix is going to take care of everything, it's not. If you have a deeply, like a strong authoritarian like thread or tendency within your culture, and you don't support, right, the broad-based right to vote more generally, and your society has dividing lines of race, of class, of gender, right, and you're at war with each other, right, well, you're rolling the dice, right? Is like, okay, so all right, I'm going to force, like, what, the worst people on the planet to kind of come out and vote, right? Now, again, a democratic theory, right, would say yes, in principle, that's a great thing, that everybody's going to have to go out and cast their vote. But it unless you have these other pieces, right, then what you're going to end up doing is you're going to be taxing poor people, right, because they don't have access to the ballot in the same way that the other folks do. So, but I think the other part about that, which I actually really like about it, however, is that if you're going to have, say, like a compulsory voting, right, what you take away from the equation is the idea that, like, well, I'm not going to vote because my vote just doesn't matter, right? It's saying no. As a society, you're saying your vote does matter, right? So we want to make sure that the vote is counted.
Yeah, and another thing about Brazil is it's just more of a younger democracy, and
Yeah,
they had a dictatorship from like
exactly.
64 to 85. So just the impact that has on civil society. It's why we see like a lot of the democracies in like Central America, like in Guatemala, for instance. They're still struggling to kind of build the democratic institutions necessary for like a lasting, healthy democracy. So in Guatemala, for instance, there was a coup in 64, and then shortly after 53, excuse me, or 54, and then like a few years later, there was a civil war that started, like a 36-year civil war. The UN declared that there was genocide that the military and the military dictatorships were carrying out in Guatemala, and there weren't peace accords till 1996. And then after that, just the people like responsible for the genocide and the war crimes were never really like brought to justice. And
Right.
then so you have this like these really like weak or fragile democratic institutions, and as we can see here in like Guatemala, it's going to take generations to overcome that. And I think like something like that shows, a case like Guatemala or even like Brazil, like shows what's at stake in the United States with this election. Because if Trump does, get into office one way or another, and he might even take power without actually winning the election,
Right.
right? What happens after that? He had that comment, some time ago saying, just vote for me this time and you won't have to vote again. Right. Like, that essentially spells it all out for us. But yeah, I mean, I thought like, the arguments that kind of like Jeff like worked through, and some of the people that he interviewed from Australia, from Brazil, from the US, because there was a study done by an expert from the University of Georgia. I really hope people check it out. And
It's really good.
it definitely gives you some food for thought about, different ways or expressions of electoral democracy that maybe we might want to adopt here in the United States.
Yeah, it's exactly it. And just like this conversation, right? I mean, once you put something like that on the table, then you're thinking about, okay, how would this help things be more successful, right? You start linking it. And I think, look, I think we need electoral reform hugely, like in this, to use a Trump word, in this country, right? I mean, things like we should be voting like on the days off, right? Voting should happen kind of even like in person and thing over days, not just a single day. We should make it as easy as possible for people to vote, right? We should not be putting all these kind of barriers in there. It should be integrated into, I have to say, I have to say, I was going to say integrated into all of our schools, right? Just the habit of voting and so on. And I do have to say, this is where I give so much credit to like teachers in our public schools. And like, I know my kids, for example, every single year, right? Whether it's a midterm election, off year election, local election, whatever, they'll do little things around the elections that's just about that habit of election, right? About, hey, let's vote for like apple pie or whatever like this, with that idea that you're talking about that process from early days on. I think that's really healthy. But just, that kind of like really rich sense of, election days are things to be celebrated. And so therefore we shouldn't have to freaking work our way through it.
Yeah, I mean, and soon, I mean, I could envision a day when something like that like won't even happen in schools, right? You know, having a maybe a mock election from students about the national election would be like too controversial.
Yeah, well, especially after, again, I don't know if there'd be time for that too, especially after you're making sure that you're going to spend a good 50 minutes of your day trying to memorize the 10 commandments, right? So,
Yes.
so it's freaking crazy. Oh man, I'll tell you. Well, I've got it. This one just kind of brought it home to me is that, one, people probably saw this already. You got Kamala Harris is going to be joined by Beyonce Willie Nelson down in Texas for a big rally about kind of abortion rights today. That's interesting to me that, you're going to have this big event targeted in Texas, which has not been a Democratic leaning state in quite some time, right? Since the Democrats stopped being racist, I think, right? Really, it's really when it comes to, but I thought that was kind of interesting to see that stuff that's play out. And we'll see. I mean, I'm always very skeptical of big celebrity stuff. I mean, look, Beyonce she's got reach, just like when Taylor Swift came out and said this, if there was, there's an impact on that. Um, I would have to say, I wish this event was happening a lot earlier, right? Before deadlines to register to vote were in, but I mean, it is what it is. If it's going to help get people out to vote, that's great. If it's going to help protect some women in the state of Texas, right? I think that's really what is going to have an impact. You say, look, Texas has some of the strictest anti-abortion laws since the overturn of Roe v. Wade, and if we get more state officials elected in Texas that can help right that wrong, that's awesome. What impact that's going to have on the national level, I just have no idea.
Yeah, and never mind, like Texas is really one of the worst states when it comes to banning books, to kind of rewriting curriculum and history. Um, and it's obviously they have the Republicans there have public education in its crosshairs, LGBTQ students, etc. So I think any kind of democratic gains in Texas would just have a real huge impact on the ground and affect families and children growing up in that state.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's why, one of the articles that I think we should definitely be highlighting today, kind of especially given that you see this rally happening, kind of a focus on abortion rights. I think this is one of the key issues that should be getting people to the polls, like, seriously, to protecting what's left of kind of abortion rights. There's an excellent piece in the Bucks County Beacon by Pat LaMarche called Dystopia Now. Big tech and menstrual surveillance at the service of an anti-abortion Trump administration. And she gets right into about what these plans look like if Trump was to get elected in a second term.
Yeah, and one of the people behind this is like Peter Thiel, who's big far right billionaire. He bankrolled JD Vance's Senate campaign in Ohio, and he sold COVID data to ICE during the Trump administration, and so that ICE could deport people, right? And then so like we were just talking, about Texas is just you can't cross state lines to get an abortion. There's like they'll put bounties on you, and if you have like digital surveillance, tracking your movement once you're pregnant, I mean, this is really, like Pat wrote, this is dystopia, right? This is something from, from you couldn't even make this up, right? In your worst nightmare. Um, so again, like this shows Pat's article shows what's at stake with this election and what's at stake for women, and not just women's like bodily autonomy, but their freedom to move without it,
Yeah.
and freedom to privacy, like one of the most fundamental freedoms. And that could be down the drain. And we know that the Trump administration are beholden to the Christian right, the Christian nationalists, who are like abortion abolitionists, who want to charge people with murder and jail them for either having an abortion, or if you're a doctor performing an abortion, and then just allowing the state to have this technology at its disposal and to weaponize it should just frighten the hell out of people.
Yeah. And, once again, it's like, all the more reason that, it's fantastic to see that discussions of Project 2025 Project 2025 have really made it at least into the quasi mainstream, because, like we talked about earlier, this is not just the kind of thing like, hey, look, there's a bunch of anti-abortion stuff, or there's a bunch of kind of things that these kind of crazy right wingers want to do. No. In Project 2025 is like starts to establish the ways that this happens, right? The ways it's going. And someone like Peter Thiel, being a major funder of the Trump campaign, being the major funder, reason that's why JD Vance is the vice president or vice presidential candidate of the Republican Party, is because Peter Thiel brought a ton of money with JD Vance, right? That's really what it's going on. Like Peter Thiel is, JD Vance is like the admission ticket, right? So that Peter Thiel now has access to what goes on in there. And he already has, as you were talking about, as Pat lays out in that piece, the technology to deploy and to weaponize, right, this kind of data. So it's just not good.
Horrifying.
Yeah, it really is. So do check out Pat LaMarche's article, Dystopia Now, Big Tech and Menstrual Surveillance at the Service of the Anti-Abortion Trump Administration. Last thing I just want to touch upon before we kind of see if there's anything kind of coming up is that, people have probably seen the news, I assume, that Elon Musk has been paying people to sign petitions, paying people $100 if you sign this petition, ostensibly to basically, support free speech and the right to bear arms. And, this is what you're doing for. Really, this is for his PAC, his pro-Trump PAC. And if you know anything about the role of petitions and PACs and mailing lists, that's really what this is designed to do. It's designed people to kind of like sign up for these emails, for the contact list, for his pro-Trump PAC, right? And in exchange for signing up for that, they're going to give you $100. The problem with this is that there's been warnings that were sent to him by the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, saying that, hey, this may be in violation of election law. And Musk's first response was something like, well, you know what? Hey, let's, how about we make this a sweepstakes then? And then we'll randomly pick people every day to give them $1 million across these 7 states, there's 7 swing states. Got another letter basically saying, hey, you better stop this, right? And then he's just doubled down on it, says, no, we're going to do it every day up until the election. And I was telling Cyril before the show, is I had a student approach me the other day and say, hey, did you hear about this woman who's in front of the student center at Kutztown University with a petition? I'm like, no, what's it about? It's like, and it was a woman working for this PAC telling college students that if they sign this thing, they will get $100. Here's what everybody needs to know as a public service announcement, right? Federal election law says that like there are consequences, right, for a misuse of election funds, both for the person who is trying to like solicit people to vote or turn out for money, and for the people who receive the money, right? So you might want to wait on cashing those Elon Musk checks because you could be held liable for something. Because look, I think most people who are signing that, they're like $100. I'll take $100. I don't care, right? And they don't care either. They don't care about you. That's for certain. But this is, really significant. Elon Musk has already said that he wants a position in the Trump administration that is going to be about dismantling all those regulatory bodies that have any impact upon his area of things, particularly SpaceX. And that's what he's doing, right? He's saying, I need like all the ability to do whatever the hell it is that I want. And so I'm going to go all in on this and I'm going to use whatever means at my disposal. And if they want to come after me, good luck. I'm the richest or second richest, depending on the day, man in the world. So good luck with kind of tracking me down and throwing me in jail. So, I mean, this is crazy.
Yet in Georgia, it's illegal to give someone a bottle of water who's waiting in line to cast their vote, right? Like,
yep.
How does that work?
It's all about freedom, Cyril. It's all about freedom.
Freedom to pass out in the heat of the Georgia heat while waiting in line to cast a vote.
Exactly. So there it is. I mean, we are kind of a little over 1 week out from the election. I hope everybody who wanted to get registered got registered. This past Monday was the deadline. And I also hope that you all are got your plan for voting. You're not going to let any of these kind of scare tactics keep you away. That you're going to show up and ideally cast your vote with a little bit of joy. Right? Cast your vote with saying like, I know I'm voting for a future for my kids, for my community, a kind of future that is going to be about, caring for each other instead of tearing each other apart. So I think that's good. So, Cyril, in this lead up to the election, kind of what's happened at the Beacon? You got anything else that's kind of be coming out, or just kind of messages that you want to send out to anybody?
Sure. We just published something this morning, a great column by local Bucks County writer Colin Coyle about the Pennsylvania Attorney General's race. And he takes a dive into kind of Republican Dave Sunday, his positions. He, watched the last debate between Sunday and Eugene T. Pasquale, the Democrat running for PA Attorney General. So, there's a lot at stake with this position. As we both know, like when Josh Shapiro was Attorney General, he defeated Trump in a bunch of lawsuits when he was trying to overturn the 2020 election. And as we see in other states across the country, is that there's Republican attorneys general that are going after doctors for potentially performing abortions, or going after people, friends and family of women who are transporting them to potentially get reproductive health care. So there's a lot at stake with this election, and so I want to encourage people to give that piece a read. We also have someone we have someone in DC this weekend who is going to the One Nation Under God event with Christian nationalist Sean Foyt. So yes, it's a Jesus March and worship gathering led by Let Us Worship and United Revival on the National Mall. So we'll be getting updates and reporting there from Kate Burns. And this will be the first time that she'll be writing for us. And then moving forward, we're going to kind of just keep up with the latest election news. I don't know if you noticed, but because we're a member of like Lion Publishing, Lion Publishers, they created a program with the Associated Press where we're able to access a lot of their articles and publish them. And so this really gives local readers an opportunity to get some more in-depth analysis about state and national politics and how it potentially impacts them locally in Bucks County or in Pennsylvania. And in addition to that, in addition to our regular writers, both, straight news reporters or just opinion writers, you often will continue to kind of republish news and analysis from elsewhere where we have relationships, whether it's like the Progressive Magazine, that we have a partnership that lets us republish analysis from them, or under Creative Commons, publishing the great work of like Carter Walker at VoteBeat, giving us these updates about like what's happening with like the state Supreme Court, or which counties allow you to cure your ballot if for some reason make an inconsequential mistake like putting the wrong date, even though they can kind of scan it and see that when this was mailed. So we're going to continue to kind of do that, and it's just like full speed ahead, leading up to the election, both state, local, and national.
Well, fantastic. And I want to just use this as an opportunity to also to remind everybody, is like you can help continue to support this kind of independent, homegrown, say progressive media right here in Bucks County. Go over to say the buckscountybeacon.com. There's a nice little kind of tab up there that say, support the Beacon. And you can support the Beacon by becoming a supporter for as little as $5 a month. You don't like doing the monthly thing, you can do it all at once, like for once a year, become a yearly member. Or if you don't kind of have the kind of money laying around to become that kind of supporter, you can make a one-time contribution if you got the money to help support this kind of media. It's so critical that we make sure that right here in Bucks County that we continue to support and help the Bucks County Beacon thrive, right? So that we're going to have that space, right? We're going to have this space where we're going to get this kind of reporting that we're certainly not getting from any other media source in the county. So head on over to buckscountybeacon.com, click on the Support the Beacon tab, and if you can, become a supporter today. All right, Cyril. So a lot on our plate moving forward, I guess. And it seems like, election day felt like a long time off, and now it feels like it's coming like right up on us like tomorrow. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing at least, hopefully a really good turnout, and hopefully not any election violence, as we move forward. Given that we're seeing these types of deep fakes already starting to trickle out.
100%. All right, everybody, have a great weekend. This is a good weekend to recoup as when you can, but get out there, knock on some doors if you can, kind of make some calls if you can, make a contribution if you can, but make sure that you're kind of ready for the week ahead. I know that next weekend is going to be a really big one right ahead of the election to make sure that we got all hands on deck. But for now, wish you all a fantastic weekend. We hope to see you back here next week, next Friday, for the Friday News Lunch. This is Kevin Mahoney and Cyril Michaleko heading out. See you next week, everybody. Look at that. Got the music working and everything. All right, everybody. Have a good one. Keep up the fight.